Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy to have you all here. I'm Diane Benson, the very proud president of LongHouse, and I am thrilled to have you all here on a Saturday morning that's clear and beautiful. I would like to remind you all that at LongHouse, we have been championing women for a very long time. We give awards every year, very special awards that we're very particular about, and we bestow them very carefully, and we don't even give them every year to everyone. But since 2001, we have given 2 design awards, and they have both gone to women, Carol Cassidy and Christina Kim, and our Arts Leadership Award, which we have only given 8 times, 6 times has gone to women. Jan Coles, Barbara Slifka, Dorothy Lichtenstein, Lisa deKooning in memoriam, Agnes Gund, and Molly Chapelet. And our LongHouse Award, which is our very, very special award that we give at our summer benefit, has gone to Toshiko Takahazu, to Alice Waters, to Yoko Ono, to Laurie Anderson, to Kiki Smith, to Billy Cian, and to Alexandra Monroe. So we are a woman-loving place here at LongHouse. And today I hope you will all, on this beautiful day, be able to see all of our grounds where we have art on view by the following women: Orly Genger, Tomiko Kawata, Margaret Ponce Israel, Judy Kensley McKee, Mario Yagi, Allison Schatz, Judith Shea, Grace Knowlton, Yoko Ono, Linda Benglis, and Toshiko Takahazu. So we feel perfectly thrilled to welcome you all here to LongHouse, and Toni, to thank you once again for making this happen.
Thank you, Diane. Hi, welcome back, and welcome to those of you who've not been to the panels before or not been to LongHouse before. I'm really, really excited about this panel. It's an opportunity for me to meet all of these extraordinary artists. Curator, we had dinner together last night. I'm just completely blown away by each and every one of them, and I think you will be too. I just wanted to thank our underwriters, Big Geyser for the water that's here for you if you would like it, David Abudi and Alpine Bank, Michelle and Marty Cohen, Geek Hampton, Eileen O'Kane Kornreich, Sherry Sandler, Tag Associates, and Tina the Store. Wow. When I founded this series, which is dedicated to Elaine deKooning, my mentor, I really just wanted to hear from women about what they were doing, how they were working, what their experiences were. I never wanted to direct the voices. I didn't want to direct the conversation and really leave it up to the panelists to talk about what was interesting to them. So I think you're going to have a really exciting conversation today. I'm going to introduce you to Justine Ludwig, who is the new executive director of Creative Time, which is an extraordinary organization that does installation work throughout New York and other locations, bringing artists together with spaces and enlivening them. I'm not going to tell you her bio. Everything is here with you on paper, but I would like to say that Justine has a really extraordinary commitment to social issues, to social justice, to what it means to be a museum or an art facility in today's world, and I am deeply respectful of that. And also has a tremendous interest in the ability to make spaces alive and responsive to its community or to the larger world. So Justine will be moderating today, and she will help introduce us to everyone else. And I'll be back at the end to just say a couple more things. And I think that's it. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Toni. It's really a pleasure to be here and an honor to be moderating this unbelievable panel. I'm completely floored by the talent that I am surrounded by, and it's been an honor speaking with everyone. Instead of being the individual to introduce each of these people, I think it would be much more interesting to have each of the artists here speak briefly about their own practice and who they are before we get into some deep discussion here, because I could not even begin to speak fully to their practice and who they are in the world and what they're creating in this moment. So, Bethany, I'm sorry, but you're on the end, so I'm going to call you out and ask you to start.
Sure. So I'm Bethany Collins. Is this on? Yes. It's working. All of my work has to do with identity and language and history. Language, I found, is often the subject of the work. It's literally the material out of which I'm making, from dictionaries, old dictionaries, encyclopedias, literary journals, old archives of newspapers, etc. So it's the material. I'm working with language, but I've also found it's a kind of prism through which you can interrogate any other topic. The topics I'm most interested in happen to be identity, particularly American history, but the work is also just about language. So has anybody read Emily Wilson's new translation of the Odyssey? I think it came out earlier this year. It's really good. I think the Odyssey was assigned, I'm sure it was assigned in high school, and I'm sure I skipped over it, but Emily Wilson's version has actually made me want to read this epic journey of looking for one's homeland. And the first line is typically what everybody has written about in all these interviews with Emily Wilson, because she translates how we describe Odysseus, this hero, this epic hero, differently than the 60 to 100 men who've translated the Odyssey before her. So the previous translations have been, tell me, muse, of a cunning man, a clever man, an adventurous man, a hero, just a man. Tell me, muse, about that man. And Emily Wilson says, no, tell me, muse, of a complicated man. And I was like, that's perfect. That's perfect, because he is embodying the positive to the negative, how we think of a hero and what that entails from the positive to the negative. All of that is embodied in calling him a complicated man. And so I'm working on a new series of comparing translations of the Odyssey, particularly when Odysseus gets back to his own homeland. And he's on, 20 years, he's back to his shoreline of his coastline, and he looks across the ocean, and he doesn't recognize that place. And that feels like this political moment to me, right? A place that is so utterly familiar and yet estranging and alien and unrecognizable. And so that's my new body of work, comparing those translations to give you a sense of what I'm doing. Oh, you haven't seen it yet.
Hi, my name is Aliza Nisenbaum. Let me see. I'm mostly a figurative painter. I use representational painting from life to depict particular communities that I engage with over a long period of time. So I'm interested in how the slow medium of painting allows for a very intimate relationship when you're sitting with somebody and depicting them from lived experience. So I've worked with various communities. My longest project to date is 6 years that I've been engaged with a community I met through the performance artist Tanya Burguera at Immigrant Movement International, where I taught a class teaching women. It was basically basic English skills through translation through a feminist art history class. And so after teaching that class, I was very interested in representing the people in my class who were mostly undocumented immigrants from Mexico and Central America. And so I use the kind of slow medium of painting to engage with people over a really long period of time. And then the painting is the starting point to have long relationships where I invite the sitters to my house, they invite me to theirs, in a kind of reciprocal situation. And I've engaged with this community, painting the same models for around 6 years, and also various other ones, like a woman who was in a correctional facility that I painted the letter she sent me for around 2 years, and then various other places that I go to, like in Minneapolis, I worked with the community around the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Whittier and Phillips communities, and the formal elements of my work come about through interactions I have over long periods of time with sitters. So the formal parts happen after the interactions I have with these with different populations. That's basically.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Allana Clarke, and I primarily work with performance, video, photography, and text. And if I were to sum it up, the kind of subject matter or content of my work is I'm interested in the body. I'm interested in my body as a starting point and other bodies in relation to mine. And I'm really concerned with the effects, the physical, psychic, ephemeral effects that historical and systematic negation have on the body, and the effects it affects the way that you understand yourself in relation to the world, or the possible ways you can be, or the possible ways that you can perform your existence in the world. And I think those are all really complicated relationships. And so the starting point for most of my work, or just, I guess, my artistic practice in general, is discomfort, and my discomfort really, or how I feel like I didn't belong in the world, or things that I didn't understand. So I would use my practice to investigate those things, and things that made me uncomfortable for the most part. And so a little bit about my background. I'm from Trinidad, but I mostly grew up in the United States. But I didn't really have an understanding of racial relations in this country. So many of my experiences made me feel, and also I was told, either I wasn't Black enough, or based on the way that I spoke. But when I would go back to Trinidad, which is where I am actually from, also based on the way that I spoke, it was very apparent that I didn't belong there either. So this kind of feeling of being unhomed or unease constantly resided in my body, and I've been using my practice to investigate the performative nature of how we present ourselves in the world.
Hi, I'm Allana Harris-Babou, and I work in sculpture and installation and video. And in my video work in particular, I like to kind of adopt the forms of what I think of as aspirational media. So cooking shows, home improvement television, home design catalogs, things where there's a host who presents a kind of perfect, cohesive world that they inhabit, one that they acquire through surrounding themselves with objects that maybe they've made, one where everything's in order and life is kind of going right. I like to kind of become that host, sometimes by myself, sometimes with my family members, and then kind of just spill the milk or make a mess, or, drill the lime into the countertop. And I'm really interested in these forms as they relate to maybe some sort of notion of the American dream, right? That through hard work and through accruing objects, you can kind of get what you deserve. You can have like a sort of upward mobility that's kind of manifest in your household or your home and the things surrounding you. I'm interested in these spaces and the like kind of paradigms we have around the kitchen, for instance. These places where we make these creative acts of genius, and how they're similar to or different from the artist's studio. And I like to kind of make my videos really look like at first glance like a cooking show, for instance. So the same lighting, the same textures and surfaces, and use this kind of familiar form as a way of getting into the viewer's line of sight. So it's the same kind of sumptuous satisfaction that you would get that brings you to the Food Network, right? But once you're there, kind of things go awry or things get strange. And so it kind of complicates maybe your relationship to hopefully your own aspiration, your own desire, and also maybe gives space for some other way of moving through the world or relating to objects and materials.
Hi. Oh, that was loud. Hi, my name is Elia Alba. I was born and raised in New York, but my parents emigrated from the Dominican Republic in the 50s, my grandmother in the 40s. And I think that that's always been kind of like that familial exchange, and that in that experience with my parents as immigrants has always kind of informed my practice. Basically, I find it the foundation of it. So I have worked predominantly for a while in sculpture, using a lot of sewing. But in the last 6 years, I've been working mostly in photography and food. I've been working on a project called the Supper Club, where I kind of set out to photograph predominantly artists of color, not so much in their studio, but create these fantasy portraits of them to just kind of reimagine them. And I would, like refer to history or refer to fashion or pop culture and reinterpret their imagery or what their practice was about in this kind of light. And another part of that project was the dinners that I started doing. Initially, those dinners were as a way to contextualize the images that I was photographing. But after the first dinner, I realized that even amongst artists of color, there was some of these conversations were very polarizing, and it made me continue wanting to explore more about how this community was interacting within itself, and also outside of itself with all the issues that were popping up. So to sum it up, I'm very interested in community and how the ways people interact with one another. I also food has now become, like, there's a thing now called food art, but not necessarily food art in the sense of as an object, but the exchange that happens so I cook a lot these dinners that I do, and bring people together to talk about socially engaged issues, and how people interact with one another. That's really the crux of it. Thank you.
So, as you all bring up, we are living in strange times, that perhaps we don't recognize our homeland in this moment. Perhaps we are dealing with themes of belonging and community. So I'm going to start with a really easy question. What is the social responsibility of an artist in this day and age? Anyone brave enough, or do I have to call on one of you?
I'll go first. It's just down the line. I will say that I don't think my work has shifted in this moment. I'm making the same work. There is a different kind of urgency to it, but there's a different kind of urgency in the world. So that feels reflective. I'll also say that, the people I find interesting are interested in the world around them. The artists that I find interesting are interested in the world around them. I reject a kind of expectation to respond for the sake of responding. I don't think an artist and an activist, of course, are necessarily the same thing, nor do they need to be. But my work responds to the world that I know. It starts from a very personal bodily place, and then it just keeps moving outward from there, right? And the farther it gets away from self, and yet there's still a through line, that's the satisfying work to me. So there's a new series of work where I'm looking back to these classified ads where enslaved people were looking for their family members. And in the 1890s, there was this, they would place these ads in typically African-American newspapers, and then they'd be read in churches. People were sending letters through the Freedmen's Bureau. They were looking for family. And in the 1890s, there started to be this phrase that cropped up was, can you help me to find my people? Can you help me to find my people, right? Do you know them? I desire to find my people. I wish to find my people. I want to find my people. There's all these different categories of ways of looking. So that feels like, again, this moment, right? This is not a new moment. We are just finding new ways to repeat our failures. That's interesting to me. It's both comforting and frightening. And it's something I would have been interested in if the 2016 election hadn't happened. It's just interesting. It's indicative of who we are, regardless. It's just particularly urgent now.
No, I agree completely. I think that likewise, I was making this work way before the election happened, and all of a sudden immigration was a very huge issue before, but all of a sudden it became this like catchphrase for people to use for their own political agenda. Or to further their own discourse, obviously. So I think that in this moment in particular, what seems relevant to me is to just break out I mean, to be able to talk to one another. Like we were speaking over dinner yesterday, to how to talk across ideological lines. And I guess in my work, I'm interested in thinking about rather than all this discursive stuff that happens on social media where we don't see each other face to face, what happens when you sit with somebody and look at their materiality and try to depict that? Painting from life is a very long process, and I'm usually faced with people who I wouldn't otherwise. You know, it's a back and forth kind of a vetting of the model to me and me with them, with a particular community. How do I enter this community? How do I gain access and am responsible to this whole network of people? And then when I have the model sitting with me, it's kind of, I mix my colors for like a whole hour and talk to them. We have dinner or lunch or breakfast, and then it's thinking about care in a way, like how do you mix every single color of their skin to be responsive to them in that moment, and the kind of intimate conversation that happens and how that extends out of that, from that. So it's like really the most basic materiality of being with somebody, and then it's hard to place ideological categories when you're having this like one-to-one face exchange with a person. So I think that's where my work tries to be somehow outside of larger political concerns and just this kind of face-to-face interaction.
So I also absolutely agree with both of you. But then I also think, in a way, essentially, art and activism are two completely different things. And I feel that way because the art world or the art market is so intertwined with capitalism that the art world is just like a smaller version of the world at large, right? So the like same dynamics are at play. So I ultimately feel if you're trying to then work within that system, there's something that maybe can't be translated because you're still working within like a really inequitable system. But I also, like, my work hasn't changed a bit in response to our political climate, because I've always thought about myself in relation to the world, or others in relation to the world, because it's all a system and we all have like a part that we play within it. And I'm always interested in understanding the part that we play within that system. But it just seems kind of funny that maybe now the art world is becoming more interested of itself within the world at large. So it's kind of just comical for me that every show is about kind of social justice, or when I think if you are a member of a marginalized group, like, you've always been aware of these types of dynamics, but it just seems like everyone else is kind of waking up to it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what you're saying in terms of, in my work, right, a lot I think about like the tropes of advertising, for instance. And I remember like the day after the election, this high-end design company sent out ads for new T-shirts that just said "resist" on the front, right? And there's something, right, the words were just bold black. There's something really expedient even about the design, right, which was that through like this T-shirt you could have this catharsis, or you could kind of reconcile everything, just like similarly maybe by like putting "resist" over the on your work or something, right? You could fix things. So I think a lot of the times, actually, for me, it's realizing the limitations of my work is what's really necessary for me in these times. That to be an artist is also to be a citizen, and there are certain things as a citizen that I have to do that can't necessarily be manifest in my work. And there is only a limited amount of energy that one has in the day, so sometimes some of that energy has to go to walking out of the studio and canvassing or something like that, right? That maybe, if anything, perhaps the role of the artist is to be not quite as wrapped up in the studio.
It's interesting when because we talked about having this question first put out, and one of the things, this is a question that has come up in every single dinner that I've had. What is the responsibility? What is the role of the artist? And believe it or not, some artists just don't want to deal with that because maybe they're an abstract artist, and that's not really, it's not really how they want to project that work. But I think the fact of being still a person of color is already a political act. And even if you don't want to be put on that spot that way to say, well, what is your responsibility? It's kind of already there because you're kind of put in a place of having to represent an entire community. And sometimes that's really difficult to do. So I can see where some artists might reject the notion of I have to be responsible because they're being responsible on a daily basis, like when you just walk out the door, So yeah, I feel it feels like an easy question, but I also think it's a very difficult and complex question. My responsibility, when I started doing these dinners, I did it because I was concerned with how my friends were interacting with one another, because the project usually it started with a lot of people that I knew, and now it's become bigger where I've included other people outside of my community and outside of my race as well, because I feel it's important to have these conversations with everyone, and also thinking about the intersectionality of young and old, gay and straight, all like a dinner. I usually curate them, so it has a whole rainbow, for quote unquote, of people in it. And I don't know, I guess I'm being socially engaged, but I don't know. I don't think you set out to say, I'm going to be socially engaged today. I'm going to socially do this work this way. I think you are because you are. It's what you're doing.
I find it fascinating that all of you have been doing the work that you've been doing for a while, and our current sociopolitical reality has not changed that, but it has made the work seem like it is a reaction, even though it's not. And so the context in which we exist very clearly reframes our practice and what we are doing in an interesting way, that it seems like a response. This idea of the commodification of resistance, or that we are stuck being reactionary when this is actually organic issues that we are engaging with that have been around for a very long time. And there are two words that I've heard just about all of you bring up, which I find is interesting, and that's belonging and visibility. Last night, I heard them come up regularly in our conversation earlier today, and now these are words that I'm hearing echoed over and over again. And I'd love to talk about how they manifest in your work. Aliza, I find it fascinating that you are offering visibility to immigrant communities that are not given that platform often. And we see that through arts, there's an opportunity to create community, to create issues of spaces where we feel like we can belong and communicate, that they can become discursive spaces, be it over a meal or through engaging critically with the translation. Does anybody want to talk about the manifestation of those issues within their practice?
So you're talking about representation?
Representation, yes, representation.
Like when I started to do the photographs of my friends, I was looking at Vanity Fair magazine, and this was in 2012. I think it's gotten a little bit more open, and and if you see the Hollywood edition, it talked about, everyone was assigned like a moniker and like assigned a personality within this, this universe of actors. So I wanted to do that with artists and artists of color and think about how I can represent not just these artists, because I did photograph some well-known artists in that project, but think about, them as individuals as in the world, and how can we make them more magical, make people of color more magical, and throw out that representation. Because I think a lot of the times, too, in art, we see images of people of color, and I also find that that they're, they're marginalized, or, they're in the hood, quote unquote, and they're living a daily life as opposed to showing an image of a superhero or of a reimagined Botticelli Venus. Anyway, so yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I feel like the issue of visibility and representation has many levels. There's obviously the level of what happens when a work enters an institution, and therefore people that enter a public museum or something can see themselves represented when their image hasn't been seen in a museum. But I feel like my work isn't particularly about bestowing visibility in some ways, but it obviously operates in that way in the realm of painting and the history of painting, but it's also like a mutual witnessing of each other's lives in the process when I'm making the work, which is the most fun part for me, how we're kind of mutually witnessing. It's kind of nerve-wracking for me to be able to paint someone and have them give themselves over, and it's very vulnerable for my sitter also to be giving me their image and sitting there for a long period of time. So I think, like Allana was saying earlier, how that enters into different economies, how I pay my sitters, how I get engaged with them, is also a very important part of thinking of escaping economies of like just exploiting, or having this kind of longer witnessing of each other in some ways, an extension in time.
So I'd like to talk about this idea of belonging, which is really important for my work. And I always often think about the idea of belonging in relationship to like history. Because all humans belong to history, right? And then it makes me think of the relationship between history and truth, because history is presented as being really objective, when in fact I don't think it is at all. It's really subjective, and it's always written in favor of kind of the winners, right? So the winners become the author of that history, and then that is the history that we understand to be subjective, and that we shape our existences, and that history shapes our relationships, and I think that something really important that's happening is in this political climate, right? There is so much tension, and I feel like within the kind of like liberal sector, there seems to be a lot of confusion of like, oh, there's racism or there's sexism still. I thought we like dealt with that. And that's because we all subscribe to this history that, of civil rights, of feminism, and thought that we solved all those problems when in fact we hadn't. And they're kind of just bubbling up again, but they've always been underneath the surface. And again, right, like I said before, if you're a member of a marginalized group, you knew that those things were still very much present, but just some of us were able to ignore it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, during the election season, and the president declares the American dream is dead, as this catastrophe that's very particular to our present moment, right? That it's something new that we need to respond to. And I'm thinking about this, it was like an interview with James Baldwin and Audre Lorde, I think from the 80s. And she says, for me, the American dream has always been a nightmare, right? And so for so many people, right? We've always been inside of it, right? But it's always been clear that it was almost meant, it necessitated our destruction, right? It necessitated for this dream to even be possible for anyone. It had to be a nightmare for some. And so perhaps some folks are waking up from this dream right now. But the reverie has always been kind of, it's always been just that.
And it's interesting that you specifically are dealing with these structures that are unbelievably romantic and idealist.
Mm-hmm.
The home cooking show that speaks to the perfect meal that one can produce for one's family or one's friends, or a home restoration that speaks to the possibility of building something that is like truly perfect, and then you turn that actively on its heels in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that you're actively taking on the subject of the American dream, or is that just a byproduct?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely, before we were talking a little bit about how people expect us to perform ourselves for them, right, when we're in our work, especially as an artist of color, people think of your role as like the emissary of your group, right, and that your role is to educate others about your experience. But for me, I kind of prefer to like adopt the role of the center and show the center to itself, right, that to adopt this kind of performance of a particular brand of successful whiteness, so that like idyllic home, like housewife or something, right? And to like perform in that role and to show how strange and kind of not centered that experience really is for actually all of us.
And there's a really strong connection between medium and message for all of you, which is something that I find interesting. You are using very different structures, different ways of articulating your message, and the medium that you use is a direct response to that and direct relationship with that. How have you each turned to your medium of choice? Because they're all quite unique. A dinner party and photographic series in response to Vanity Fair is something unbelievably specific. Each of you have found this very unique way of articulating. How have you reached those ways of speaking, those ways of communicating?
Well, I could.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So actually, my background is in photography. So that's kind of where most of my formal training lies. And so at the kind of beginning of my art practice, I would go out into the community and like capture images, bring them back to the dark room, right? And even in that description, so much about the language of photography for me started to feel really violent, right? Because I'm shooting a photograph or I'm capturing an image. I'm like cutting something out or cropping, right? So there was something conceptually, it just felt wrong conceptually for me to continue with photography, and then also thinking about it historically and like anthropologically, of like colonizers going out into the world and capturing images, and then those individuals that they captured, literally capturing them, but then also capturing this like representation or simulacra of them and spreading that across the globe, and those people didn't have control of their image or their representation anymore. So like I just started to fixate on that, probably maybe a little too much, and I wanted to turn the camera on myself, because at least I knew I was fully consenting and understanding the capturing of my image, and then it's spread or sharing in the world. And then also I felt like I wanted to, if something made me uncomfortable, if some sort of like act made me uncomfortable, then I would turn the camera on myself and re-perform those things or present my body in a certain way, knowing that it would be consumed. So I turned to video and also performance at the same time. but then an attempt to kind of co-opt that relationship a little bit. Most of my performance work where my body is present, it's always for video, and those works are probably the most vulnerable, but still there's this kind of distance or separation between my actual physical body, and if I create a performance video, I have the benefit of being able to watch you watch me, right? So there's still distance, and then there's still this element of control that I retain. So that's kind of how I got there.
With me, how I got there is all very personal. I think I mentioned before, my parents emigrated from the Dominican Republic in the 50s. My mom, I think it's my mom, I think the most. A lot of the work that I used to do was like with a lot of sewing. There was always fashion. There was always enough money in the house for Vogue. And my mom, my parents really couldn't afford the clothes, but my mother learned how to sew very early on. And I always felt we were the most stylish kids on the block because of her. And on top of that, this is, I think, where my fascination with fashion came out through that. And then as far as like the cooking was concerned, there was a party in my house for everything. Everybody's birthday got a big party. Because the Dominican community was very small still back then. I think the big influx came in the late 80s, early 90s. And so the community was small and people just gathered together over meals all the time. My mother would spend a couple of days preparing the meals, cooking them, and people would come over. And the conversations, I mean, as I remember vaguely, weren't necessarily they weren't really superficial. There was always politics involved. There was always a place, like what was their place within the American landscape and how they felt out of place in the landscape. I mean, I always felt my mom could have been a fabulous designer if she wanted to, but, because she felt insecure about language and coming, there was, she just didn't feel secure being in this country. Even becoming an American, it was a lot easier to be an American in the 60s than it is now. You came, if you proved yourself and worked, it didn't take 7 or 8 years. I think within a year or two, maybe sooner, I don't know. So all that really peppers everything that I do, all those talks that I remember as a child, all those conversations, my mother's own feeling of insecurity. Same thing with my grandmother. She came here earlier in the 40s, and she used to make hats, these amazing hats. I can't remember. She told me the name of the milliner she worked with in the city. And she worked with this gentleman, and he taught her how to make hats. And my grandmother, too, was always very, very stylish, and she just made all her own clothes. My mother would even make our coats because she wanted us to look a certain way. And then the dinner conversation. So all that really informs my practice very, very much.
Yeah, okay. I'll share. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So I am not a good first responder. If you ask me a question the second time, I will have a really good answer for it. But the first time, I'm like, well, I don't know. So I think in my practice, so that's from childhood, right? That's just personality stuff. So in my work, I am looking to be like master of language. I want to own it. I want to control it. I want to say it's mine and not yours. I want all of that in the work. And so, what is the master of language? It's like dictionaries. That's the first thing that I turned to. And then the problem became, can you find poetry in the dictionary? And you can. Is it a part of speech? There's a kind of word, it's called a contronym. Contronyms are words that contain their own opposite meanings. There's about 88 of them in English. They exist in other languages, but I'm monolingual, so I can't find the poetry there. But within those 80, there are some particularly beautiful contradictory words. So quiddity is a contronym. Quiddity means the essence of something and a trifling nothing. It is everything and it is nothing simultaneously. And that feels like a way to be thinking about the body and race and identity, which is what I'm interested in, and also to be thinking about 10 other things at the same time. Ravel is another beautiful one. Ravel means to complicate things and to ball it all up in like a Christmas light kind of knot, right? And it also means to draw it out and make it simple, make it linear, simple to understand. And so that sense of language as that there's nothing that we cannot understand if I just have the right word to say to you, that is so tantalizing. Simultaneously, I'm going to fail, we're going to fail at understanding one another because language comes from us. And, you know, innately we're like super capable and super failures, right? It's just who we are. Over and over again. And so that's tantalizing to me, and that keeps showing up in the work. So for that series, then, what I usually do is print those opposing definitions on 2 sheets of paper. It's usually American Masters bright white paper. And then I'll transfer those dictionary definitions onto each sheet, rewrite it in graphite so that, again, that language becomes part of my body becomes part of the language. And then I use my spit to erase it. Spit's a little bit more acidic than just water, and so it eats into the surface of the page, and that then falls beneath the work. And so language becomes, you know, eventually they'll be framed, but every once in a while they get shooken up a little bit, and that language will continue to fall and continue to evolve and maybe continue to fail. Like all of that is embodied in the dictionary, you know, the boring dictionary.
So beautiful. Follow that, but I guess my medium is basically obviously painting and also pedagogy, because I teach. I'm a professor, and also I'm really interested in theories of teaching, like Paulo Freire, who was a Brazilian educator who was interested in how teaching can be a mutually transformative act. And so I grew up in Mexico City, and I grew up bilingual, and my family were actually also Jewish immigrants that came to Mexico from Russia. So I'm really interested in thinking about how to question identity, you know, how a person that's Mexican can be really, you know, how we're all really complex identities and not easily definable. And so I'm really interested, for example, in things as unrelated to pedagogy as plein air painting, like Monet and all the Impressionists, and going and painting on site. So that's why when I was teaching this class at Immigrant Movement International, I decided to set up a studio in the middle of the class of the space, and there'd be like OSHA classes or DACA seminars in the back of the small storefront, and I'd be painting in the middle of the space, and it became half pedagogical and half a painting practice in some ways. So I'm interested in how I'll paint also like a guard that has been guarding museum paintings for 30 years, and then he sees his own image and how a painting comes about. So there's the medium of painting, which is a way of representing somebody or making a document of a community, but it's a really slow way of documenting. You have to get involved over an extended period of time with individuals and with a larger community, and how to pay those sitters and those change structures of economies of payment, and thinking about a slow document in a way.
I think I'm really particularly interested in surface. I began as a painter. And then as I kind of realized that there was only one moment in the life of a painting I was interested in, it was when it was still wet and still in a state of becoming. I thought, why don't I just show people that, right? So I started using video to kind of document when the paint spills and so as I started trying to figure out how I would edit videos, I thought about the videos that I saw most often in my day-to-day life, which were music videos and television. And so now I'm really engaged with the surface of the screen, right? Because screens are with us from the moment we wake up until the moment we go to sleep, right? And they have really particular shapes and sizes. There's the intimacy of the YouTube video you hold in your hand. If you watch a cooking show on the television monitor, sometimes the host's torso is the same size as your own, and they say, I'm me and you're you, and today we're going to make a cupcake, right? You know? And so in that way, because of the screen, there's this kind of element of the present tense, right? That you're both there in the same moment, making the same thing together, hypothetically. Screens are in our purses and they're in our domestic space, right? When you turn the screen off, it reflects your own image back at you. So I'm really interested in the kinds of content that move around in that really particular medium, that particular surface. Sort of different from videos, maybe like in a more cinematic or projected context. The kind of really quotidian mode of storytelling that we're always actively kind of moving in and out of.
So you brought up a really interesting issue that we've talked about before, which is the art world as a microcosm of our larger world. We use this strange sort of semantic trick where we say art world, which is a very strange way of framing the reality that we work in, the field that we are a part of. And you're all pushing very important social issues, and many of you teach. So this comes to what I think is going to have to be my last question before we open it to all of you, which is what needs to change within our field in order to build a more equitable and positive future?
I'm ready for this one.
Go for it.
Because it's so relevant, and so yes, I teach at Williams, and I've introduced a curriculum of performance art, and I started last year. So last summer, basically, I was just like in the New York City Public Library every day before I moved to Western Massachusetts, like doing research, gathering images and text and whatnot. And so as an educator, right, my starting point was looking back at how I was educated. And as I came into my art practice, I started becoming angrier and angrier about the way I was educated. And so specifically like arts curriculum that was taught to me. And so so I teach an introduction to performance art class, and the starting point for that is the Dada movement. And so, I'm reflecting back about what I was taught about Dada and like Hugo Ball and Tristan Tzara, right? And all of these amazing, wonderfully sane men that created this beautiful, savage thing, right? In response to like, First Mass World War, and what kind of like heroes or like avant-garde, they were so avant-garde. But now that I was doing my research, I was just like, this is bullshit. That's not true at all. And I just felt so angry, right? And so then I set out on a course to correct all of those misteachings that I was given as a student. And so I just am always have this awareness, or it takes me a really long time to build a curriculum because I'm just always thinking about like competing or converging histories, right? How do I not only present to my students this like thin or hierarchical linear line, right? But how do I teach them about multiple histories occurring at the same time, and how messy history is, right? So it's yes. Did I answer the full question? I went off on a tangent.
No, but you gave it a very interesting answer.
Yeah. And also, right, so for me, the teaching and my art practice are kind of one and the same at times. Because, I am thinking about pedagogy all the time. I'm thinking about forms of knowledge and the hierarchies of knowledge that are presented, in kindergarten to high school to college, and it's all so purposefully constructed to either allow some of us to be bosses but the majority of us to repeat this cycle of just being low wage workers, right? And then just like dying, and that's it.
And then we die. Yeah, I think also, right, you're saying this term, the art world, right, feels very strained. And I think a lot of it is maybe just kind of loosening up that stress or allowing this to be more porous or just allowing us to acknowledge, right, that it's always been art worlds. But I think even more so now, especially because I also teach at Williams. And my first assignment is always to make students do something themselves on their phone, for instance, right? That so many people are content producers right now. To have them kind of realize that they're always kind of engaged in these creative acts, whether it's like on their Instagram feed or, in the realm of social media, in the realm of just things that they're documenting and texting to their friends and family, that there are really specific choices that they're making when they frame an image, right? And some of those choices might be related to what they saw when they went to a museum, but maybe some of them have never even been to a museum, that we're always kind of floating inside of this visual culture. And it doesn't feel so necessary for me to always think about how my ideas are going to loop back into a gallery space or something like that, for instance.
I think one of the important things that needs to change is how we listen to each other rather than the kind of road rage that's manifested in mass media, and how we express this anger towards each other's viewpoints. I think active, kind of more gentler listening while also raising the stakes of responsibility for artists, for institutions, and for all the structural elements of the art world have to be raised while also listening more carefully. And I think that because of the lack of structural support under this government, at least, communities have to come together in innovative new ways, and grassroots organizations have to form in ways of mentorship or support that are totally new and are probably we're going to have to be really creative about the ways we find support for younger artists and for especially marginalized communities. That's done. I think it has to be, like we were talking about Tom Finkelpearl and his strategy to diversify boards. It's one thing to diversify like students and education and artists, but it has to come from a much deeper place where everything gets shifted.
Do you ever watch Shark Tank? No. You don't watch Shark Tank? So Shark Tank is like a show of they started off as entrepreneurs. Now they've all made it, and so people will come on the show and bid for can you give me money for my startup? I'm a young entrepreneur. Yeah. So it's so fascinating that when women come on the show, all the male sharks will go out and they'll be like, I don't know what this product is. I don't know how it works. And then maybe the women sharks will actually give them some money to start their business. Same for people of color. When people of color come on, there's one black shark, African-American shark, and everybody will go out. They'll be like, I don't know what this sponge is. I don't know what it does. I can't give you money for this. And then Damon will be like, I understand. Here's some money. So you see the metaphor, yes? So, the art world should be reflective of the rest of the world, right? Curators, art historians, artists, academics, all of that should be more reflective. Maybe the male sharks will never give money to the women sharks. Maybe not, but if there's more women sharks, maybe it won't matter, right?
Collections need to change. I'm taking it back to representation. I don't think women are collected enough. We know that. Artists of color are not collected enough, put into collections. When they bring in shows, I think the institutions have a responsibility to articulate works that's not, I don't want to mention an institution we were talking about before, but this particular institution be able to articulate an art, if they bring in someone from Brazil, not just talk about line and form and it's a female, talk about those aspects of her being a female, talk about those aspects of her, why she's painting black figures, and understand that why, and put that with all of that together, with the form and the beauty of those paintings. I'm not sure where we can start with that, but I think collections and exhibitions really need to put out, because it's all part of history. It's art history. And when history is reflected back out, it just empowers people. And if people feel empowered, I think we have less tension.
Thank you so much for your answers and your generosity. It's so much food for thought, and I think it's only fair that we open it up to questions from the audience, because I'm sure there are lots of pressing issues people want to speak about. Do we have a microphone?
We do.
Wonderful.
Hi, this is a wonderful panel. Each of you, I think, contributed a great deal, so thank you very much. You talked just now about what needs to change for women. That's a topic. Can you address what you think has changed, even a quarter of an inch, a little bit more for women?
Within art or just in general?
Within art, please.
I think you are seeing more women in institutions, being shown. It's not enough. I have to bring up the Me Too movement, even though it's not art, but it is. I mean, the fact that these, the calling out, when you think about within the art world, of young women that had to kind of subject themselves to the professor in order to get ahead, in order to get advances. I think the fact that we are more empowered to say, no, you can't do that anymore, or no, you need to get out, or no, I'm not going to go see your show. I think that's a step. That's a step in a direction that will empower women more. Just the calling out. And taking action, institutions taking action really is where it's at.
You are seeing cultural institutions more actively speak about these issues, and speaking about them, bringing attention to them, is a first step. That's wonderful. We're aware there's unbelievable inequity, and it's something that needs to change and something that we need to address. So wonderful, we're having these conversations, and now we're at the moment where we need to take action in a really active way. So for me, that's an unbelievably exciting moment. We're at that precipice, but we need to take that leap. We need to actually make it happen now that we're sitting and having a panel in which we're actively addressing this issue. That is a wonderful thing. But let's talk a little less and maybe have a little more action now that we've been having these conversations for quite some time, and now in more and more public forums.
I wanted to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for sharing such personal realities with everyone today, and to thank another woman artist for making it possible for me to be here and see the diverse, amazing light and talent coming from all of you. One thing that wasn't discussed today, whether you're picked out of the group of so many artists, whether you're male, female, white, thin, fat, beautiful, however you're perceived, your sexual gender, whether you're picked out in the world called the art world, which really for me has nothing to do with the creation of art. I have found my art to be totally life-changing and healing to me as a person, but the biggest journey that I feel art permits for each of us is to get inside, is to get closer to who we really are, which is, of course, changing every day. But that journey is critically important and very healing. And I was wondering if any of you want to talk about that. how healing art is for the individual artist?
I can tackle that. Because I think that's extremely relevant to my practice, and especially because my practice is so focused on my body. And kind of when I started making my work, or specifically the performative video work, I was so terrified. But then I started realizing that there's something about being scared or terrified that was going to change me, and the only way that I could kind of address things that made me feel extremely uncomfortable was through my art practice. So, and of course, having validation from the institution of art is integral to continuing to make work, right? But for me, ultimately, the most important thing about anything that I have made or will make is that it changes something within me. It heals me, right, bit by bit, and it heals me from just the world. All of those scars from either family or from culture at large. We're all kind of scarred because we're just human. And if the work that I make can kind of put a Band-Aid or something on each of those scars, then that's really powerful. And I know that if that's where I'm coming from with my work, then I will affect someone. I don't have to affect everyone, but just someone out there. They can feel something or connect to what I'm doing, and that's really powerful.
Any other questions?
You want to talk more about Shark Tank?
Exactly. I want to cast you in a reality show. Just curious, given Me Too, and I know it's not the topic, but if there are any personal stories of either women that have been really positive mentors. Toni dedicated this to her mentor. And similarly, have there been any obstacles that were clearly because you are women that were kind of profound that you'd want to share?
Well, I like to, if we're dedicating it to somebody, or just mention a mentor. My mom, because I feel like that domestic space that watched through her was very influential. As a mentor, I look at someone like Lorraine O'Grady. She's 85. She's been around for a long time. Things that I have encountered, I'm encountering a little bit of ageism now because I'm older, and that's one thing. And I think that's a thing that women encounter overall, not just in art. Once you pass that, I don't know what that age is anymore. Let's just say 35. You're 40 and it's like, and then 50 and then, and then people think you don't, that you can't create new things, that you don't have new ideas to put out there, that only young people have new ideas. So anyway, and I mean, we have many examples of artists I know that after a certain age have created incredible bodies of work.
Other questions?
Okay.
Hi, thank you for this. It's been really inspiring because I have a 16-year-old that's just done a program for Planned Parenthood and was shocked to realize how we are not supporting women, in our world, in our neighbors in Riverhead. So carrying the torch, I think, is really important, but I always wondered if artists could create a space or a caravan or an architectural space like Burning Man does but something for women where they can meet, whether it's in the desert, whether there's vehicles where they can congregate annually and have these discussions, where it's not just in the Hamptons, where it's picking up people from all different parts of the country and allowing them to speak, allowing their work to be seen, and not just isolated by those who have these grandiose judgments on what's good and what's not, and have females continually, such as you, be mentors to older women and younger women, to all generations. I just would love to see more spaces created by artists welcoming other artists and other voices, you know, just to encompass that. And I just want to know if any of you guys have ever thought, because I know you're professors and you're passing the torch in that way, on how you could create, or if you have created anything of that nature.
Well, I've done this supper club, although there has been males, and there are gatherings, but we have had like female-only dinners where we've had, you know, and these discussions are private, but there's a book coming out, so some of the excerpts will be published in that. But we've had those kind of spaces, and I have to tell you, yeah, it is really needed to have that kind of just like a safe space, for lack of a better word, that's just for women by women, you know. And it's difficult. I mean, I even though we know a lot of women, I still think it's difficult because we are navigating the art world, and we don't want to be seen. I don't know if this is true for the young. I mean, there was for a long time, young women didn't want to be identify as feminists, and I think that itself is a change, because I do see that younger women are embracing that as a possibility. So I feel even that alone is like a kind of like a figurative gathering that's happening.
I think we have one last question.
Hey guys, can I hang out with you guys?
Yes.
I'm learning
Yes.
so much, and I just want to say thank you guys so much, and thank Toni and LongHouse for being here. I'm learning so much, so thank you guys. That's it.
I actually had a question. Justine, I was interested in hearing your answer to your last question to the panel about what you felt needed, what change you would like to see.
Thank you for asking. And I think I'm going to echo quite a few things that were said across the panel. I believe across the board, we need to be mindful of issues of representation. I recently moved to New York. I was in Dallas, Texas for 4 years prior to that. I spent time working in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I've seen the responsibility of a curator to speak directly to one's community, to function as a translator between the artists and the community in which they're being presented in. And I think that's something that cultural institutions need to really be held actively accountable for, that the art that you are showing on the walls, that your staff, that your board looks like your audience, and if it doesn't, you create opportunities for that to change. We are looking at the world around us in the arts. We are responding to the world around us, and so we should look like the world around us as well. And that's something that we actively need to be mindful of, and if that's not something that we can achieve in this moment, we need to take steps in order to allow that to be something that is achievable in the future.
Oh, I can't believe I'm following this. I'm somewhat speechless. I can't thank you enough for each of you being here. You're not from here. You've traveled long distances to get here. And I just owe you a deep debt of gratitude, both for being here, for being so incredibly open with us, and I'm really proud to know you all now. I would like to thank Suzanne Cochran, who is the chairman of the board of Creative Time, for hiring Justine and bring her here to us from Dallas, and B, for making the connection for me with her. I would like to thank LongHouse, Jack Leonard-Larson, Peter, Matko Tomicic, Wendy Van Duzen for making this possible and so comfortable and so welcoming. And if you've not had a chance to walk around the gardens, I highly encourage you to do that now, tomorrow, whenever you can. Last time we were here, it was pouring rain, so I'd love for you to take advantage of that. Also, one of my hopes for these panels was actually to maybe it would lead to some change, and that would make us think a lot harder and to become more action-oriented. And you may notice that I am wearing a shirt with words. And these shirts were made by Sarah, and she is here today, and I'm giving each one of the panelists a shirt. And if you're interested in the shirts, she can give you one of her cards, and you can order them from her, but I'm giving one to the panelists. And and then as a gift, I have also related to words and women. Can you open this for me? Thank you. A book that was introduced to me by a panelist last year who I just met at the panel, whose name is Zina Sarawiwa, and she introduced me to this book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And I think it's a fantastic book and a really pretty easy read for the density of the information, but it's really about the inception of the written word and the kinds of male-dominated language it developed. So I have a book for each of you, and I thank you so much. And have I forgotten anything? No? Okay. The next one. Oh, the next one. Thank you so much, Kristen. The next panel and the last panel for the summer is on September 22nd. Also a Saturday, also at 11 o'clock, and that panel is still in formation, but it's moderated by Barbara Toll, independent curator, with Alice Hope, Kennedy Yanko, and a couple of others that we will soon announce. And thank you very, very much.